All right, good afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started. If I could get folks to take their seats. Thank you for coming out on this fine November afternoon to the Fox River Ecosystem Partnership's monthly noon network program. This one a little bit about how we can find funding for some of our watershed projects. My name is Jeff Mengler. I work for Hay & Associates, but I'm the current president of FREP, as we like to call ourselves. And one of our traditions is just to go around the room and introduce ourselves to give our speakers an idea of who's in the room. So I think we'll just start right over here with you, Cecily.
Cecily Coombs, Baxter and Woodman, senior environmental planner and also the watershed planner.
You're my old boss.
I'm Holly Hudson with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and also on the FREP advisory team.
Michelle Zimmerman, I'm the Assistant Public Works Director for the Village of Alcorn Plan.
Carter Dell, Restoration Ecologist for Campton Township Parks and Open Space.
Jesse DiMartini, just here.
Phil Cotter, Village of East Dundee, Director of Public Works.
Karen Miller, planner with the Kent County Development Department, and I'm a co-chair for the State of Wisconsin.
Donna Rickard from the Village of Port Beaverton.
Linda Sonner, Batavia resident.
Devin Brad, Batavia resident. I used to live in Clark Hub. Paid Stormwater Conservation District and board member for FREP.
Hi, Karen Dalton Lang. I'm the coordinator for the Flint and Spring Creek Watersheds Partnership.
Greg Mills, I'm a citizen of Geneva.
Carol Mills, me too.
Perfect.
Becky Collard, communications manager.
Scott Lee, City St. Charles Public Works.
AJ Randy King, St. Charles Public Works. Tim Graham, City of Batavia Engineering Department.
Chris Ballon, City Batavia Engineering Department.
Dominic Coker, City Batavia.
Kenny Anderson, Engineering Construction Associates.
Courtney Miller, Village of City Hall President.
Andrea Pedraza, City Batavia Director of Public Works.
Allison Neal, Executive Director, Batavia Park District.
Kim Hansen, Director of Parks, Batavia Park District.
And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Allison and Kim, who will give us a little welcome on behalf of our host, Batavia Park District.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you all for visiting us in our new home, the Callahan Community Center, named after Patrick Callahan, the longest serving park board member in the history of Batavia Park District, 27 years. We have 6-year terms, so our park board likes to joke and say it's a life sentence. But it is a pleasure to have all of you here today. This building just opened up August 9th of this year. It's been a labor of love. It was purchased in 2021, and our partner, the Batavia Historical Society, pitched in $340,000 to help us acquire this building. It was a gift that they gave to us. They wanted to have a Depot Museum expansion. The Depot Museum is right across the street. Highly recommend if there's time after this meeting to pop on over there. They are open until 4 o'clock, so or 2 to 4. So I think it'll be maybe after this meeting. But the Depot Museum had an expansion plan, and they needed to move the collections of all of the exhibit collections to another location. They were bursting at the seams across the street, and they actually have additional storage lockers that have all of their decades old of storage. And so what we did was we created the expansion plan that allowed them to not only move the collections over here, but create a makerspace. So now we have a makerspace area on the other side of the building where we can offer classes. We can rent sewing machines where you can come in, take a class, learn how to sew. We actually have a curator's workspace where you can watch an exhibit like midway through the process. Maybe it's a mannequin that our curator is dolling up for an exhibit. You can actually watch a workshop or a exhibit in motion, we like to say, come to life before your very eyes. And we also have Batavia Access Television in this space as well. So when they were no longer a part of the school district property, they needed a new home. And the Batavia Park District was open arms and said, for $1 a year, you can come live with us. So the Historical Society played a part in us acquiring this building. We still are going to do a portion of the museum expansion at the actual Depot Museum building. So again, hundreds of thousands of dollars are going to go back into the museum across the street as well. So if you gave any money for the museum expansion project, rest assured that it helped this facility as well as it's going to help the original effort as well. And we have a play lab enrichment experience for 3 to 5-year-olds in this facility. This particular room is called the Skyloft. We call it the Fishbowl. Staff calls it the Fishbowl. The best view in Batavia right here of the Riverwalk campus. This Riverwalk campus is jointly shared with the City of Batavia, our great partners, and the Batavia Park District. And I bet of significant interest to you is the future of the Depot Pond. So next year we are going to be surveying our community members, asking them what they would like to see for the future of the pond. You know, would they like to see it return to a natural area? Would they like to see us put an earthen berm in? We are aware that the city does have intentions of removing the dam, and we want to address that. And we need data. We need a lot more data. We want to hear from the community so that we can make decisions based on data and not just emotions. So we want to make sure we're making very calculated decisions. And so right now, what our short-term solution is, we want to keep the dam, or the dam, no, not the dam pond. We want to keep the pond. The dam is not ours. That's the city's. They have the deed. We have the deed for the pond. We want to keep the pond healthy. And so our main goal right now is to add aeration into the water. So we're going to be adding 2 circulating fountains next year. And I wasn't sure we were going to get some claps for that, if any fans of fountains, but 2 fountains in the middle of the pond. We do think that'll help a lot with aeration. And we also have been doing some water harvesting. So uprooting that duckweed. So the water harvesting took place 2 weeks ago, and we are going to be doing that again next year too for the health of the river. So I hope that makes you happy, because I know that that's a significant interest to all of you. We do know that we need to have a long-term solution, and this is, we have a short-term solution. So we are going to be asking the community, our residents, for what they would be willing to see here, as well as willing to pay for. Oops, that does work. And also of significant interest is the Clark Island area, just south of here. So much thanks to Karen Miller at King County, the Fab Fox. I'm gonna butcher the name of the grant. Fab Fox Water Infrastructure Trail Grant. $240,000 that the Park District did not have to pay, or the City of Batavia did not have to pay out of pocket, because the grant that King County applied for to put brand new kayak canoe access launch in by Clark Island. A brand new launch was added, and we cannot wait to snip the ribbon in spring to introduce all of you to it. So right now, the Park District, we're looking at getting some kayak canoe storage lockers, almost like a vending service, so that way if somebody doesn't currently own a kayak or canoe, or maybe you don't have the appropriate rack for your car or truck, we can certainly, you'll be able to lease, quote unquote, one down at the Clark Island area. So, and we did just invest a lot of effort into that area. So we've got a brand new fishing pier with limestone outcropping right along the Clark Island, right along the Fox River, a brand new skate park, bike pump track, and outdoor fitness court as well. So I invite you to tour that area if you haven't been there in a long time. And much thanks to King County. Boy, I really talk with my hands. Much thanks to King County for the Fab Fox grant that allowed us to be able to grant even more access to the water. So again, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here. And I hope you get a chance to tour some of the areas that we talked about, the Depot Museum, the Clark Island area. Just take a stroll along the Riverwalk, our boardwalk, and welcome to Batavia.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. And we will, as I'm working on our 2026 FREP schedule of new network programs, she mentioned the new canoe kayak launch. So there were 5 that have been put in. The company I work for did all the engineering, design, and permitting for those and worked with those 5 communities. So we'll facilitate a tour of 1 or more of those during our 2026 season. We're just working on lining up the dates and choosing which ones, and that's pretty fun and exciting. And now I think King County is pursuing up to 2 more of those along the river, so more ongoing things with our fabulous Fox National Water Trail. But without further ado, let's get to today's topic, which is how to use watershed plans to get funding for your watershed projects in your municipality. So we will have 4 speakers that are each going to speak for a little bit, give us some of their experiences and their case examples, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask all of them questions at the end. So I guess I would say if you have a question that's very specific to something they say in their presentation, you can maybe ask that as we go, but otherwise we'll hold the questions till the end when we get all 4 of them up here. So first we'll hear from Cecily Kuntz with Baxter & Woodman, and then I don't remember the exact order they're going in, but you will also hear from Holly Hudson from CMAP, Michelle Zimmerman from the Village of Algonquin, and Andrea Pedraza from the City of Batavia. And then we'll bring them all back up for some questions at the end. So, and this is, by the way, being recorded. We've had requests for that. We're trying to figure out how to master our technology so that we can post the recording on our website afterwards. All yours.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Super happy to be here. And for those of you who know me, I would love to meet you in that maker space at some point in the future. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off and talk about what a watershed is and what watershed-based planning is. I'm going to talk about some common sources of surface water pollution, stuff that might be in our streams and rivers, and then what a watershed-based plan delivers to address water quality. So first and foremost, what is a watershed? Well, think of a bathtub where all the water that falls in that bathtub is going to go to the drain. Similarly, a watershed is the area of land for which, and it's driven by topography, but where all the rain or precipitation that falls there drains to a creek or a stream. Watersheds do not follow political boundaries, so that is like the biggest reason to have a watershed plan, because it includes all the different players that might be included within that land area. Watersheds come in all shapes and sizes. I hope most of you know that most of the land or all the water that falls around us is all going to eventually drain to the Mississippi River. That's a watershed. And then nested within that are ever smaller watersheds. So we are also specifically in the upper Mississippi watershed and the upper Fox Rivershed, which is the smaller one within that. And then watershed-based plans are typically done at a smaller scale, and many of the communities here already have watershed plans in place. So watershed planning is a voluntary community-supported process that assesses the health of streams and develops strategies to improve them. And it's an opportunity to bring us all together and talk about the problems that are there and find solutions to fix them. The specific, when I've mentioned watershed-based planning, that is a very specific type of plan that was instituted by the EPA. And it's delegated to the states. It's got a few different names, sometimes 9-element plan or a 319 plan, but regardless, they're all meant to improve water quality, and they encourage the development of these plans and reports and implementation of the projects that are included in those. They lead to the identification of restoration projects and policy changes on the ground. And they are totally voluntary. It's an incentive-based program, so if you have a watershed plan, you are eligible for funding to implement that plan, and that can be that's a huge driver for getting these completed. So why do you want a watershed plan? Well, to assess the health of your watershed, quantify the amount of restoration needed and the types of restoration needed, identify those actionable projects and recommendations, build community support to implement the plan over time, because it's not, it's projects that are sometimes on municipal property, but sometimes on private property, so there's a lot of players included there. And prioritize all those projects for funding. So which ones do we want to do first, and which ones are like the most important to get funded? So the steps in the typical watershed planning process include, first and foremost, developing those partnerships. Typically, you're going to meet every other month over the course of maybe a year or two. During that time, we're going to assess and characterize the watershed. What are the basic existing conditions? Develop goals and identify solutions. Design and implement the program and what we've recommended. And then we're going to also include in the plan a way to measure our progress over time. Like, are we implementing enough? Is it helping water quality? So within a watershed base plan, we're going to focus on, there's two main types of pollutants. There's point sources and non-point sources. So point sources include things like wastewater treatment plants or industrial polluters or construction, anything that would require a permit. All of those are regulated by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and while we look at that data within the plan, the focus of a watershed base plan is everything else. So, and those are all considered non-point sources. So those typically look like they're urban areas, anything that might sheet flow off like a parking lot or our roads, or cropland areas, and as well as stream bank erosion. So again, watershed based plan focuses on the non-point side. And the main pollutants that we look at, first and foremost, are nutrients, which include nitrogen and phosphorus. They are necessary for plant growth, but they are highly detrimental in aquatic systems, so they're really bad for our streams and rivers. They can cause algal blooms and accelerated plant growth and deplete oxygen levels, which can all lead to fish kills. Sources of those nutrients are stream bank erosion, agricultural row crop runoff, lawn fertilizer, failing septic systems, and some of those point sources that we mentioned earlier. And then the other big pollutant that we look at is sediment or total suspended solids. So this is sediment that's in the water column itself. These reduce light penetration and oxygen levels, and they can make it harder for fish to go about their business and hunt. Those sediments can also settle out in streams and lakes, might need to cause dredging, and they can also cause or clog sewers and lead to flooding. Sources of sediment, very similar to nutrients, stream bank erosion and removal of vegetation from banks, construction practices and site grading and any kind of land disturbance, agricultural row crop runoff and soil loss, and increases in impervious surfaces. So a watershed-based plan is going to include an action plan, or basically a list of things we can do, the community can do, or projects we can install to improve water quality. And they're typically split into two different categories, a programmatic action plan and a site-specific. And a Think of a programmatic action plan as a list of like maybe policy updates or things you could do anywhere in the watershed, while a site-specific action plan is all the on-the-ground projects we would have found over the course of the planning process. So policy recommendations might include adoption and implementation, or implementing the plan. I was just at a presentation with Andrea on Monday to adopt the Mahoney Creek Plan here in Batavia. Ordinance reviews and updates, green infrastructure network protection, road salt recommendations like sensible salting programs, conservation design, green stormwater management, septic system maintenance, native landscaping, and pavement alternatives. And then site-specific measures definitely might change from one plan to the next depending on what is going on in a location, but most often they're going to include things like stream bank and riparian area restoration, wetland restoration, detention basin retrofits, agricultural best management practice recommendations, and then some more specified urban BMPs like rain gardens and permeable pavers and bioswales. Typical plan is going to include a site-specific action plan table, and that is basically a big long list at the back of the plan of all of the projects with a priority. You'll see there's one here that has is highlighted in red. Oh, you can't see my cursor. But anyway, that is a critical or priority area. That means it's like first in line for funding. Basically, it's we include enough information in these tables so that anyone that has a project included in the plan can go out for funding for those projects, which again is the big driver. It like sort of does all the math for you. And then finally, a plan's also going to include an implementation strategy, how, some basically tips and tricks on implementing the plan over time, as well as how we're going to get the word out to the community about the watershed plan, a water quality monitoring plan to track our progress and improvements in water quality over time, and then a list of potential funding sources. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Holly to talk a little bit about partnerships. Give us 1 second to switch screens.
Gotta find the file. Alrighty. Voila. All right. Phew. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Holly Hudson again. I'm a senior aquatic biologist at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and Fox River Watershed residents here. I'm going to touch a little bit on when doing watershed-based planning, how we facilitate and fund plans. So my outline today, kind of who can lead that process, where do you get your funding support. I could spend even a whole nother probably hour on steering committee, setting those kinds of things up, and stakeholder engagement. So that would be for another day. And then just touch on some upcoming planning efforts that I know of, and maybe you know of some more, and resources. I always like to end with some resources so you can follow up for more information. So watershed plans are typically led or facilitated by one organization, and it can, there's no one way to do a watershed plan or lead it. It could be a municipality within that watershed. For example, Algonquin kind of is an example of that. Wanted to do a watershed-based plan and called up all the other municipalities and people and got the band together, and got something started. Around the region, so county departments or divisions like Lake County Stormwater Management Commission, DuPage County Stormwater Management, McHenry County, Planning and Development, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, when we're talking down in Chicago area, those have all led plans. Our local soil and water conservation districts, for example, Kane DuPage has led some, DeKalb County is quite active, their soil water district as well. Land conservancies like the Conservation Foundation, the Heartland Conservancy down south, Open Lands have been some of those that I know of have led watershed planning efforts. Can be really any other watershed organization, like Friends of the Chicago River, for example, leading some in the Chicago River system, and as well as regional planning commissions like CMAP. You may or may not need consultant assistance. Sometimes CMAP has done plans all by ourselves, but oftentimes we'll bring in a consultant to at least help maybe with some modeling that has to be done, something that's more complex, or to do a big chunk of it, like can you do the whole watershed resource inventory, that type of thing. Remember, these watershed plans are intended to benefit all the communities. You want to get all the players together, all the stakeholders. So you have maybe, again, a steering committee, a technical advisory committee. You're engaging the stakeholders in various different ways. There are so many different ways to lead and facilitate and get input. Maybe, again, we can talk about that another day. So where do we get the money? Well, you can be self-funded. I would say, again, depending on the extent of your watershed, how many players, how urban it is, versus maybe it's largely agricultural, I think it's easily 100,000 to even 250, 280,000 as a budget, to keep that in mind. So self-funding, it's possible, but maybe that's more when you're doing an update of a plan. Again, these plans, you might think of them as every 10 years, you certainly want to sit down. If again, you should be tracking as you go, but certainly sitting down, doing a refresh at those 10 years. And those typically come in, for example, Village of Algonquin has done just that with one of their updates. But we often look to grant programs. So Illinois EPA has 2 grant programs. These are sections of the Clean Water Act, so Section 319, the Non-Point Source Pollution Control Program, and the Section 640B, Water Quality Management Grant Program. And I'll go into that in a little bit, the next slide, a little bit more. And then there's other grant technical assistance programs. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources does have a coastal management program. Now again, they're limited to their scope, so they're not probably going to come out here to the Fox River watershed. There's foundation grants from time to time. And you always want to just keep your ears out, keep your, up to future programs. There's also sometimes supplemental funds, like for recently we had the bipartisan infrastructure law, so some of that money is being used to supplement Illinois EPA's grant funds to help with developing watershed plans as well as implementing plans at this time. So just get a little bit more into the Section 319, really anyone who can legally receive funds from the state of Illinois is eligible, and that you have the authority and the ability to do that proposed project. You must be pre-qualified through the Illinois GATA, the Grant, I can't remember what that means. Anyone? Grant Accountability and something Act. Transparency Act, there we go. Thank you very much. These are 60-40 grants, so you can get 60% of the funds. You have to have a minimum 40% match contribution that can be cash or in-kind services. Now, out of this 319 pot of money they have that Illinois EPA has every year, again, these funds get passed down from US EPA, and each state gets an allocation. So there's a portion of the 319 monies, it's a smaller portion that can go toward planning. For example, I think in FY25 there was about $400,000 available for planning, and no more than 50% of that money per cycle can go to any one entity. So if they had 40,000, only 200,000 could go for planning. You say, that's not quite enough for me to do my watershed plan. You might need to add a little of your own funds, or sometimes Illinois EPA will let you do that in sections. Like maybe I'm going to do that watershed resource inventory work in this cycle, and then I'm going to apply to do that. Let's develop those plan recommendations in that second cycle, funding cycle. So there's different ways to get around things. Again, you can't use federal funds for match because this is a federal grant program. Again, typically just one application round per year, and these are typically 2-year grants. Illinois EPA does have a cycle for funding priorities, so every 5-year cycle. So for plan development, say as in year, like this is a little old, so FY21 was well, let's look at FY24 was the Fox River watershed for planning, and then 2 years later, it would be a priority for implementation. So in FY27, that grant cycle, the Fox will be a priority for implementation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, just because something's a priority doesn't mean you shouldn't throw your hat in the ring. I'm a proponent, keep throwing your hat in the ring, because maybe everything gets ranked. Maybe yours rises to the top, even if that watershed isn't a priority watershed in that particular funding cycle. 604 programs, similar, except there are more restrictions on who is eligible. So only area-wide planning agencies like CMAP up here, Greater Egypt down south, Southern Illinois, and other eligible entities like all the soil and water districts are eligible, and certain local governments. You need to make sure with Illinois EPA that you would be eligible. Say you work for a county government. So DuPage County Stormwater Management, for example, has received 604B grants because somewhere in there, I don't know, we call it your charter or enabling legislation or mission, you do water quality management planning. So it gets very specific. Again, you need to be pre-qualified through GATA. No match required is for 604, though they do allow it. And the grant ranges are typically $50,000 to $350,000. Again, there's typically a little larger pot of money available through 604B, so maybe they can fund 2, 3, 4 grants across the state in a year. Again, one application round per year, and again, typically a 2-year grant. How does CMAP get involved? Well, again, we've facilitated plans, engaged the stakeholders, developed the plans. We've done several of them in the Fox River watershed. We've also administered grant. In the past, we've gotten 319 grants and divvied those out to sub-consultants who have developed plans. That was many of the early plans in the early mid to late 2000s. Advisory, we sit on advisory committees for folks doing, people doing other plans. We'll provide our input and a review, and we also help with grant applications. For example, I just helped the Friends of the Chicago River with one for one of the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. So we'll see what happens there. An important thing I wanted to bring out is this return on investment. Say you have a group, like you're a municipality, you want to get all your bandmates, all your municipal friends together, the county perhaps, maybe the forest preserve. Again, these plans benefit everyone. They're collaborative, as Cecily mentioned. You have a shared vision and goals, and you have those common watershed-wide recommendations, as well as this opportunity where you have those site-specific recommendations. Because when you apply for a grant, Illinois EPA often says, what page is it on? So you have to point. My stream bank stabilization is listed in table, Appendix A, page 580. Well, maybe hopefully we don't have quite 500 pages. I do have had 300-page plans. Try to keep them succinct at least. But yeah, you got to point to where your project is identified in the plan. You share these planning costs together, and important point: these can pay for themselves. Let's say you had 5 entities that had a planning budget of $250,000 and 40% match. Let's see, would be $100,000. You engaged your partners. You had 5 partners. You each threw in $20,000, and then 2 to 5 years later, you decide, okay, I'm going to do this stream corridor restoration project that's going to cost $1.5 million. I apply now for another 319 grant. I do have to have $600,000 in match, but I'm going to get $900,000 in grant funds, so I have a net $300,000 that I've received for that $20,000 cash out that I spent a few years ago. So it is worth the time and money. What I know of, some upcoming watershed-based planning activities opportunities to be involved. Again, you want to be at the table when these happen so you can get especially your site-specific recommendations in there. So some of these are, again, remember I talked about this kind of 10-year cycle. The Tyler Creek Watershed Plan was one of these very old plans. Time to update. So that includes like Elgin, Pingree Grove, Gilbert's, a little bit of West Dundee, Kane County, Forest Preserve District will be certainly involved there. And then Blackberry Creek, which is Kane and Kendall County, and First and Otter Creek, kind of south Elgin area as well. 2011 plans, time for a revisit and update. You know, Kane DuPage Soil and Water had led the Fox River Jokies Creek plan. They are just waiting for they applied for 604B funding and are just waiting for that grant paperwork to come through. And I know up in McHenry County, they're starting a county-wide watershed planning initiative to do watershed plans for the whole county, starting at the Kishwaukee River will be the first one. And actually this Friday at their Kishwaukee River Ecosystem Partnership meeting, they're going to be talking about that. I think actually Cecily will be talking about that as well. So if you're interested in getting the Zoom link to that, you can leave me or Cecily your contact information. We'll make sure that you get the Zoom link for that. And then the future Fox River watershed will be updated. And there's several, this is a CMAP, it's on my list to update. We want to paint the whole region green, right, with watershed plans. This is a 2020 map. I realize it's out of date. That's why I kept it small so you couldn't see it very well. You see there's several Fox River sub-watersheds of the Fox River that are included. There's what I call the Nine Lakes plan. There's the Boone Dutch Creek, Silver Sleepy. Those will all be when we'll probably wait till McHenry County starts that process to update, like to develop a plan for the whole Fox watershed. Those sub-watersheds will also get updated at that time. I always like to leave you with resources, so these will be available. How to do watershed planning, engage stakeholders, as well as grant funding. I wanted to point out this Illinois Catalog of State Financial Assistance. That lists all the grants available in the state. You can get on their mailing list, and they'll send a weekly email listing what grant opportunities have opened up. And with that, I think we'll have Andrea is next. So to talk, we have Andrea and Michelle to talk about things going on in their own communities and how they have been using watershed planning for implementation.
There we go. As Holly said, Andrea Pedraza with City of Batavia, and you heard a little bit about how you get to watershed planning. We actually implemented one and we just had it adopted, well, sort of. We had the first step of adopting it. It'll be next week, will be the official adoption of Mahoney Creek Watershed. So I'm going to kind of go through the process that we went through, and documentation is the biggest part for any municipality as you kind of are thinking about this. This is Mahoney Creek. And it's a little loud with the volume, but I'm going to go through some background on the watershed. So we have Mahoney Creek is the only watershed that is fully within the City of Batavia, and within our corporate limits we have about 1,300 acres that encompasses the watershed. It is on the east side of town, so just a few miles that direction, and it has Fabian and Kirk as the main thoroughfares. We have a tributary lake on that as well. The only part that is actually mapped is our main line of the creek, and then the tributary is unmapped at this point. Here is an exhibit just kind of showing the original creek, and before it got developed, and you can see all the curves and all that, it comes from the farm fields. We have some savanna that is on the far east end of that. And then as time has gone on, we developed and tried to fit the creek into the subdivisions that were built around it. You can see that the blue line is now where the creek lies, and we kind of diverted it a little bit from the orange where it was originally at. With the age of these subdivisions that were constructed, you may have noticed, I'm showing the plan here that shows that we have detention online, which is no longer prohibited, but it provides detention within people's backyards that also encompasses the creek. So this is one of the biggest things that we have to contend with, is accessing the creek through private property. There are easements that allow us to get onto the property, but it's not necessarily something that the city goes out there to maintain all the time. So as I mentioned, we have easements along the creek. I know it's hard to read, but you can kind of see where the dashed lines are, showing that a lot of these properties in the one subdivision, they have just about 100 feet of frontage here, and then the rest of it is dedicated to stormwater management, and that in itself is quite an obstacle. The easement, again, allows us access to construct, maintain if we so choose, and the ability to remove things. I have removed things from there. I am not some of those people's friends, but and one of my coworkers who's sitting in the back and probably going to hide, he also had to go out there and take down some trees that they were obstructing flow. They weren't in the greatest of health, and by the easement rights gave us that ability to go out there and remove those. So these were all things that we were hearing about. We were hearing about flooding. So we were just documenting this as we went along and kind of taking things, and the list kept on growing and growing. So we had to do some education with the residents as time went on and explaining what the easements were. I don't know how many times we mailed out copies of easement plats to them so they had that language, because it's not something that they would get when they close on a house. It's something in a document that's filed away at the county. Some residents don't know how to access that. They don't even know what it means sometimes, so I had to educate homeowners on that. And a lot of the property along the Mahoney Creek is owned to the center line of the creek, so there's two owners, one on each side. And people do like to use it as their own property, so we have had trees, structures, play structures, maintenance type debris in there. So we do want to educate the residents about the importance of creek maintenance. We have a 5-year cycle of rotating through all of our creeks in town, where we send out mailers as part of our MS4 to all the residents and business owners, where we give them ideas and explain what a watershed is. So I'm just going to kind of go through these pretty quickly, but it just gives it basic information. Over that 5-year period, people move in and out, so we feel that it's important to refresh people and explaining how to treat your property a little bit with natives and stuff like that. The city treats Mahoney as a regional, kind of like a storm sewer, right? But it's just open channel, so we do provide some maintenance for that, and we have done some work. But we have worked with the private property owners, some of which include the Park District. I'm going to kind of go through a bunch of these. I have a bunch of pictures, and again, I said documentation was key, so we can kind of see and provide to residents as we had open town halls, the different nature, flowing full banks, trees right on the edge. The problem is then the water washes away at the root system, but they're also there to hold the roots of the shore in place. We have bridges and abutments. There's the debris that's going and washing, and it gets stuck in the culverts. Looking at ways that we can stabilize that. There's a pile of debris. All it takes is that little bit of increase in flow, which this creek is tributary to Kirk Road runoff, 2 miles of 4 lanes, 5 lanes of roadway at a steep enough slope that the water comes really flashy through here when we have the storm. just natural leaf blockage, dead trees that may fall, all different kind of things. So we started back in 2020. March 2020 to be exact, had planned some public meetings and stuff like that, but everybody knows what happened in March 2020, so we were not able to go that route. But we looked at the conditions of Mahoney Creek, and at this time we had hired HR Green to help us and AES at the time, and we provided a stream and creek assessment with lots of exhibits and kind of just a guide as to how we would go about that, looking at all our areas and where we can make improvements, finding out property owners, and then looking a little bit at funding sources. So with that, the week the world shut down, I had Logan Gilbertson and I'm drawing a blank, Sylvia from HR Green walking through people's backyards, and everybody was wondering what were they doing because nobody was leaving their house. And so it made it really easy for Logan to go through the area because people were too afraid to ask him what was going on. But they had divided the area up to 17 different reaches. Some of it was due to the uses. The creek does drop pretty rapidly in some areas. We also have really steep embankments getting up to the grade as well. So it starts in the industrial area on the east side of Kirk Road for the main stem. And with that, they came back with an assessment, and all of the green areas are the good areas or minor erosion severity. Yellow we should probably take a look at, but red were the highest priority. I will mention at the time that this was done, the city had already spent our own dime on 2 of the reaches here, doing some improvements just to severe erosion. One of those we partnered with the Park District, so those were green because we had taken care of them. Again, documentation, so when they went out and did the assessment, you'll see some of these photos are dated March of 2020. You can see all the different things that you don't really want to see that are going wrong. Fences that are falling because they're eroding, abutments of the bridges, storm sewers that have fallen off, trees that are just holding on by their roots. As part of this, again, we're educating the public, but we also want the public feedback. So because we couldn't do things in person like we wanted to, we ended up sending out a survey and asked people what their main concern and priority was for the creek, specifically for their property, and then as a watershed as a whole, and then also provided them with a little exhibit of what their property could look like in an easement exhibit, explaining what an easement is. And for a survey, we sent out 442. We had 68 residents respond. Not great, but it was sufficient enough. And out of those, we had a third of the people that were directly impacted by the creek respond. So that was kind of, fantastic for that. We did do online webinar, probably one of the first webinars we had to start implementing and doing through COVID. This is just a graph representing some of the concerns, and you can see that flooding, creek erosion, wildlife habitat, and then the trees were of the highest concerns for individuals' properties. So we were taking a look at those items and how to assess those, and just be able to be cognizant of those as we move forward. And to end that assessment, they provided us with a cost of all the different reaches, and the cost range, you can see the high estimate, low estimate. Again, these were from 2020, but overall for the total waterway range of $6.6 to $8.8 million worth of work. Again, private, public, properties along the way. And with that, Logan and Cecily kind of mentioned that it would be a good time to start doing a watershed-based plan, because then you can submit that to the IEPA and then you rank higher for getting funding. So we went ahead with that and started that in 2021. Out of the stream assessment, there were 6 high priority sites selected, so I'm kind of go over a few of those. And out of these, we have already completed one of them, and one of them we currently are working on, which we received grant funding. So because it was in the watershed-based plan, it helped us get that. So this is the current project that we just received grant funding in 2025. We submitted it maybe 2023. I was told I would get grant funding in 2024. I was so excited, but it was like, keep it quiet. Can't say anything. You're getting about $500,000. I waited a whole year, and then we got the word this year. So we're going to be looking at the project, which once upon a time, one of our previous city engineers thought it would be a good idea, and back in the day when you pipe your creek. So they went ahead in that red dashed line, they repiped the creek. And then the park went in, and there's a path, and every time we had a heavy rain, remember flash flood, this is from that 2 mile of steep slopes along Kirk Road, they would have the pipe clog, the debris go over the path. Park district would have to go out and close the path, put barricades, then go back and remove the barricades, clean it up. Part of the park is used for soccer field practice, and then there is an adjacent tot lot. So this project is going to be removing that pipe, daylighting it, and then meandering it and installing wetlands, while also removing a few of the overgrown trees in that area. This project is the headwaters of Mahoney Creek tributary, where all the water comes off of Kirk Road, and we saw numerous residents along that stretch get flooded, including one of our former aldermen, and advocate for getting funding. When I started the drainage program at the city of Batavia in 2008, was $50,000 a year to solve all the drainage problems. With me advocating that wasn't enough money, and other staff there, and items like this were brought in front of council. They have since upped the funding and have been able to help us better the lives of the residents. So we have to thank council for seeing that $50,000 wasn't enough. But this was, again, headwaters of the Mahoney Creek tributary. It drained to both sides of Kirk Road. One side, the east side, is Fermilab, so we worked with them. And by the grace of God, the parcel that we put this pond on, it was deeded to the city, but it also is attached to that lot on the right side of the screen. And when that lot was sold, the whole parcel went with it, and we were like a day late to getting the easement for the what was detention. So saw that the lot was for sale. The city was able to purchase that. And my nickname is Paula Bunyan, because all the trees that you can see in here I cleared, and the residents were quite upset. So from this we learned, this was during COVID, the project moved quickly. We learned to be a little bit more outspoken to let people know what the reason was for, but you can see the basin in here that was constructed, and it used to have 2 hard 90s. Now it goes into an open water area and has that ability to go out through a piped access, which has greatly reduced any erosion downstream of the pond. And then we put in a lot of screening, a lot of arborvitae, additional trees after, because people were still not happy. So again, we were open to working with them. You can see here's a lot of the tree cover, and this is in the winter months, which we ended up, that's when we are removing any trees that we have with the less amount of leaf coverage. It helps the residents because they're already used to seeing it down. This is some pictures I'm going to scroll through real quick of getting that basin up and going, and there's kind of a final one. And then I'm going to jump ahead to just the end of September. We finally got approval of our watershed-based plan after submitting it in April of 2022. So 3.5 years later, we finally got it. But while it was in there, they were approving things, so we did get that grant funding from Michael Wild there. So within our watershed, we had, this project was one that we funded prior to any work being done. It was, again, erosion. The slope against Wilson Street was eroding where we had a fence and public walk. The city paid for the full thing. Woodland Hills Park, again, this was very flashy from just down the stream from where the water entered at Kirk Road. The partnership was with the Park District in the city, and we have enhanced that, put some stabilization, some rock riffles in there. It's made it a wonderful asset to that neighborhood. And then here's the park. You can see that the stream is going to be meandering back through the park with a wetland area. And those are some of the projects that we have completed to date. As we did the watershed-based plan, it was important to put all the different areas and mark them as critical so that when we're submitting for the grant funding, that those are ranked as the higher priority projects and also higher priority for funding. So some that Michael Wild was listed on there. Aldi is one of our big corporate people that is at the headwaters on the main stem, some of their private properties on there, so they can also, private property owners can also use this and submit on behalf of themselves as well. So there's a simple kind of cost breakdown of looking at it a little bit deeper and going through a list. And if anybody's interested, you're more than welcome to thumb through this afterwards. We have the list of when the priorities of these projects should take place. If they're immediate, 1 to 10 years, they can wait a little bit longer and stuff like that. And again, anything that you put in there helps when you're submitting. So that's all I have. Again, I mentioned HR Green and Baxter and Woodman, so thank them for all of their partnership in this and some of the slides that I used. So that is all I have. And next up will be Michelle Zimmerman from the Village of Algonquin.
Thanks, Andrea. As Andrea said, I'm Michelle Zimmerman. I am the Assistant Public Works Director with the Village of Algonquin. As of this year, I have been with Algonquin for 30 years. So I started watershed planning and implementation of projects in the watershed about 20 years ago. I am going to talk about the watersheds that are in Algonquin, and I'm specifically going to go through the projects that Algonquin has done in the watershed. This is how we implemented them, the funding sources, and how you can get money to actually do your projects. Let's see here. Okay, so Algonquin, we are in 2 major watersheds, the Woods Creek watershed and the Jelke Fox River watershed. So first question is, why do you want to implement your plans? The plans has goals in it you're trying to achieve for your benefit of your community to mitigate problems. Andrea talked about a lot of those in her presentation. We also have regulations that we have to follow now, which are our MS4 permits, our county stormwater ordinance, and they require actionable items to be done. So what are some of the goals we're trying to achieve? Stormwater runoff storage, reestablish or increase volume. Stormwater infiltration and water quality. We want to do flood mitigation and reestablish our floodplain connections. And we want to deal with soil erosion and sediment control. Also, an added benefit is creating wildlife, habitat, biodiversity, and beautification of your community. Just some examples, dealing with stormwater runoff storage. This is an area where obviously we had stormwater detention and it wasn't maintained, so it grew in with invasive species and sediment, and we lost our detention capacity. And then these are the before and after the restoration of that area. And all my pictures, I'm standing in the same spot when I take these, so they are a very good indication of before and after from the same vantage point. Here is one where we were doing stormwater infiltration and water quality benefits. These are detention basin retrofits. So back in early subdivision developments in the 70s and 80s, they were turf grass detentions. We've converted all of the village-owned ones to naturalized detentions. And you can see the before and after look and benefit of these. We also do flood mitigation. So this is our Dixie Creek Reach 5 restoration project. Obviously, there's no floodplain connection here. There's no stormwater flow through the creek as it has been neglected, and the invasive species have grown up. So the before and after of doing a floodplain restoration and mitigation project. This one was to deal with erosion and sediment control. This was Sewanus Creek. Obviously, huge erosion of the banks here, causing water quality problems. And then afterwards, pulling back the banks and reestablishing the creek flow. And so you can see from the video, the creek is staying within its banks. It's not eroding, or staying within its channel. It's not eroding the banks, and that's taking care of the erosion issues of the side slopes. These are just some other various projects that we have done that were just more strictly for habitat creation, biodiversity, and beautification. So we did a pollinator project here. We did an oak savanna restoration. I like to show this one down here in the corner because one of the big things when we do restoration and we remove all the trees and change the landscape is that all the deer and all the animals are going to go away and they're never going to come back, and we're ruining their habitat. And this is a great example of a prairie, and this is a very large buck that's hiding within the prairie. So it's, where they like to be and where they were evolved to be. So it's kind of neat to see them come back to these areas and do what they're supposed to do. And then this was just a fen restoration. So where do you want to do your watershed planning? Cecily alluded to having an action plan. So obviously I heard this from my colleague, if you see something multiple times, it probably means it's important, which means it's very important to have your action items so you know where to do your projects and the priority. And also these help to get your funding for grants when you're in critical areas, and they're shown in your action plan. So the next question is, how do you implement your watershed plan? I think there's 3 key steps to this. You need a cheerleader first and foremost. You need to make your watershed plan part of your codes and your planning documents so that you can enforce it, and then you also need money to fund it. So obviously the cheerleader is me. I started out life as a cheerleader in high school, and I still am one. Your cheerleader educates your board, your residents, does your PR, writes codes, attends meetings, coordinates everything, advocates for watershed planning and nature-based solutions in anything and everything that's going on within your organization. And this person is often the interface with other departments such as community development, public works, other outside agencies. The step 2 is to make the plans part of your code. We have had our village board adopt all of our plans, and they are in our village code, and therefore we can implement them when we have new development coming in or when we're doing public works projects. we can incorporate green infrastructure into those. And then you want to also adopt other codes and other items that will align with your plans and your goals. Obviously, we've adopted the King County Stormwater Ordinance. We got rid of all our old and outdated stormwater codes. We did write a conservation design ordinance that sets standards for what our green infrastructure network should consist of. Obviously, it has some things like, acres of land that should be set aside for green space, buffers, connectivity throughout the community. And then we just updated our comp plan this year, and a really important part of that is to mirror what's in your watershed plans. Therefore, when new development or when anybody is coming in looking at your comp plan to develop or do anything in your organization, it is laid out what has to happen from the get-go. This is just kind of an example of the Woods Creek watershed here, had the priority green infrastructure protection areas in it, and our new comp plan outlays what are our green infrastructure overlay districts, which then automatically triggers conservation design must be done. And anybody coming in from the get-go knows if they're looking at any piece of land, this is what the village is going to require. So finally, the question that most people often ask is, how do you fund the projects? I'm going to go through all the different ways that we've funded our green infrastructure network. First of all, we used codes to develop a watershed fee for new development. So every residential unit that comes in gets charged $250. Commercial has a different rate. Over the period of time since we implemented this, we've collected $169,000 from the watershed fees. These monies are restricted in our budget, so they can only be used to do restoration projects. We had converted Blue Ridge Detention Basin from turf grass to a naturalized basin using some of our watershed fee money. So new development is paying for mistakes or changes in old development. We also have collected fees that are established in the county stormwater ordinance. So the Kane County ordinance allows us to do a wetland mitigation fee or also a fee in lieu of detention in some cases. Those are our costs for that. So we charge $100,000 per acre for a wetland mitigation fee, and then the ordinance outlines what you have to charge for fee in lieu of detention. Since the adoption of the ordinance, we've collected about $900,000 using these mitigation fees. An example here is Gaslight Park, where you can see the before pictures. That was a detention basin on line with a creek, and had gotten silted in and neglected and all the typical things that happen, invasive species growing in, and then we restored it to a bird and butterfly sanctuary and wetland. You can also fund through grants. Holly talked a lot about this. You have your IEPA 319 and GIGO grants. Through those, we have gotten about $1.1 million through these types of grants. We have some private grants, ComEd, Clean Energy Foundation. We've gotten about $50,000 from that. SSRP, which is through your Soil and Water Conservation Districts. We've gotten $65,000 for that. And then DECO often has some pork money, if you know where to find it. Through your state representatives, we've gotten about $350,000 through that type of funding. We have used this type of money. Here's a project where we did a creek restoration using, I think we had DECO grant, and this was an IEPA 319 grant. Another way to fund your projects is have new development do it. So when you have your codes in place, you can require your new development to put in your green infrastructure. great example of this that happened in 2021 was the Trails of Woods Creek subdivision. It was called out in the watershed plan as a green infrastructure network priority area. Therefore, we required the developer to use conservation design, and about a third of this subdivision was dedicated to the village as a green space, natural area with where most of the detention for the subdivision is, all naturalized, and it has beautiful walking paths through it for the community. You can also create local dedicated funding sources. We did do a telecommunications tax. We also use our local sales tax, and between these two taxing sources, we've implemented about $7 million worth of projects through this. So an example of a smaller project is we did a Woods Creek Prairie at Bunker Hill Drive. There is a little creek here, and again, just restoring it to more of its native condition. And then another way to do this is to build them into other construction projects. So we got federal money to redo major thoroughfare in Algonquin, and we had to increase the pavement width, so therefore we had to put in more detention, and those detention we created as naturalized detention basins, so that the federal money was helping to pay for the creation of those pieces of green infrastructure. Dixie Creek Reach 5 restoration, we were having to do a major force main upgrade to one of our lift stations that was running right along the creek. So as part of that, we restored the creek, and that came out of the water and sewer utility fund as just part of the upgrade to the force main project. Other ideas that you can use for funding are special service areas. We don't do these in Algonquin. You can implement a stormwater utility fee, also which we don't do in Algonquin. And then oftentimes people work with nonprofit organizations. They can help you install projects, and then sometimes they will help you with the maintenance, ongoing maintenance of those projects. So kind of to wrap that up, in the 20 years we've been doing this, we've funded approximately $14 million worth of projects, and none of it was done through property tax money. It was done through all these other funding sources. So it's not competing with where your property tax money has to go for other services in your community. It's possible, you can do it. My favorite thing, teamwork makes the dream work. That is all I have. I don't know if we're all coming up for questions or how you're doing that.
Yeah, so we've got a few minutes where we can have questions if you have something very specific, or for all of them. Maggie?
So, Michelle, could you talk about how much money the city has cost avoidance because of these kind of projects?
So I can't really quantify, the reduction in flooding, other than because I've been doing it so long. 20 years ago, before we didn't have a very large green infrastructure network, we would get like an inch of rain, and it would be like a disaster area in the village. It was like all of our crews were out, everything was flooding, backyards were flooding, roads were flooding. It was all hands on deck. Now, that little video I showed you, I think that was like a 4-inch rainfall in maybe 24 hours, and we're really doing nothing. It's handling itself through, the sustainability of the projects. The other thing I'd like to talk about is with green infrastructure. So the village has about 350 acres of mowable space, formal landscape beds, that we have to maintain, and that contracted service is about $350,000 a year to maintain all those. We have approximately 700 acres of restored natural areas, and our cost per year to maintain that is about $150,000 to $170,000. So big savings there. Quantifiably.
Sorry, on that note, Carter with Kansas Township, we run burns. Do you burn your retention ponds?
So we burn everything that's a restored natural area is on a perpetual maintenance program, and it's a 3-year cycle. So after the initial 3 to 5 year establishment period, we burn the first year. The second year we do targeted invasive species control, woodies, plants and everything. And then the third year we let it just sit. And then we start the cycle all over again. So everything that has been restored stays on that cycle forever and ever. And we do have a long-term funding source for that.
That's awesome. Quick question on that then. How do you handle it since you're burning so close to residences, those retention ponds? How do you handle communication or any backlash on social media? Do you have a plan for that?
Yep. So we do all our burns contracted with an ecological company, so they handle all the public outreach through their website. We do put signage out that has a QR code that you can scan on your phone. It talks about burning. We put social media posts on. When we started burning 20 years ago, the fire department would show up, all the residents would be out there, and now we don't get any calls. And in fact, like areas that aren't restored, we actually have people calling like, when are you coming to restore my backyard? When are you going to burn my area? You know, and we obviously don't burn or maintain things that don't have a restoration to them, because we don't throw good money at bad. But yeah, now it's so common because we've been doing it so long that it's really a non-issue.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Andrea. Easements through those neighborhoods, were those easements established when those neighborhoods were platted?
Yes, they were. So there's some areas that there might not even be easements and the creek just runs through it, and therefore it's just completely private with nothing. So it's a hodgepodge of everything.
So how do you address those areas then if you wanted to do something?
We would probably have to work with getting a temporary construction easement of some sorts and working with each individual property owner. And there's magnitude of 20 to 30 probably in that older part of town that I don't know if they have anything on there except just the lot.
I'm sorry, just following up that, you're talking about easements. Have either ever encountered people who have private dams on their creeks or impoundments there and then had to move through that? Or?
We have the online storage, so for our specific creek that I talked about, Mahoney Creek, there's Davian baskets that are at the back end to hold the water in. So that's the only thing that we have there, and we've had to replace some of that because the rocks have fallen out of the chain link and stuff like that. But as far as anything else, the only other thing are if they put in bridges that we've worked with them and talked to them about getting them permitted.
I have another question for Andrea. So the Wild Park, Michael Wild Park, was that a 319 grant you got?
No, unfortunately we did not get, we applied for both 319 and the green infrastructure. We just got the green infrastructure. We were hoping we could stack the grants, but I think it's like $200,000, right?
That we're getting?
No, that we're gonna have to pay.
Oh, yes.
And then 200 for the park district. So it's about $1 million plus, and $150,000 to $200,000 is all we have to pay out of pocket for each entity for that improvement.
And then Mahoney Creek, the tributary basin along Kirk Road, was that all self-funded?
That was self-funded. That was one of those things where every time it rained, the storms are coming with a lot heavier rain quicker, and so you're like, oh man, who's calling me today? Thank goodness for caller ID, right? So you could wait to answer the phone, but yeah, we decided that was important, and that was about $1 million.
Maggie?
Can anybody talk about the importance of watershed planning and implementation to addressing climate change?
I mean, again, it's a lot, the rain events and the weather events are a lot more intense than they were. And kind of like I just described to you, you know, back in the day, 1 or 2 inches was a big deal for us, but doing sustainable, connected green infrastructure, we're seeming to be able to handle those larger events with really no problem at all.
So I think that's something you have to bring in to just to think about that and try to put those practices and plans in place in advance and get ahead of the game, so to speak. Internalize that into your, like you say, codes, ordinances, your capital improvement planning, all of that.
So I know that there have been studies done about the economics of carbon sinks, meaning in trees and pastures and prairies and things like that. And I'm just wondering if that is becoming any part of the conversation right now, that they can quantify how much carbon is being sequestered by these municipal projects.
I don't know if any of the watershed plants or groups that I've been working with that have gotten to that level that they can actually start looking at that sort of data.
So would you get on it right away?
I'll add that to the list, yes.
Actually, CMAP did, it's probably 10 years ago, we had this kind of ecological calculator. And we did that in one of the plants. Up Dutch Creek in Henry, but then that person left and that knowledge left. So, but it's something to revisit.
If anybody could do it, he's for it.
That's what I'm thinking.
Any questions?
I got one more question. For the responses for the survey that you put out to the neighbors for the creek, flooding scored really high, but safety scored low. What other safety measures are you looking for other than flooding, and why do you think the community didn't really care?
Because I think at that point, it was just that flashiness of the creek that they were repeatedly seeing that happen, and their property was getting damaged with the amount of water that was sitting there or what was being washed away. Otherwise, during the summer, that creek could be seen, a bunch of it has cobblestone as the base, so you could walk across it. I mean, it's all the way down to the ground, so I just think that out of those people that responded, it was also pretty level ground, not as steep embankments going down. Would be my best guess as to why that was probably highlighted.
Okay, I was just curious.
There was mention of rethinking how the depot pond, you know, to make it more eco-friendly. There was a recent article in the Daily Herald about the eco pond that might be used under a Fox River in St. Charles. Would that be a feasible solution for depot pond? Do you want to talk about it?
I do, and I think ultimately the city owns the dam, the park district owns Depot Pond. We have to do what's in the best interest for the city in long term. The DNR is looking at removing all those impoundments to keep the continuity of the river flowing, and that comes with consequences. So I know the city and the park district are having conversations about that, and ultimately it's the same taxing body that would be paying for it. So we're still working together on that to see what would be feasible as far as the best benefit for all of our taxpayers and residents. And getting feedback, as Allison had mentioned, as to what people want to see. I know there are a lot of people that live, there's a high-rise building right here that you may or may not be able to see with the trees, but those people paid for a water feature and they don't want to see the water feature go away. So you have all of that to tinted,
From what
but
I understand about the concept, the water feature does not go away.
that also is with the DNR and funding. DNR will fund to remove the dam fully. A park has impoundments in it, and then that would, again, who's gonna fund that? DNR potentially has funds to remove the entire thing. So again, this is a bigger conversation that I can answer in a minute or two. There have been long meetings about this.
All right, any other final questions for our fine panelists? Otherwise, thank you all for sharing all of Thank you for the questions. Our goal will be that we'll try to put their PowerPoints and PDFs on the press webpage, and then this was all being recorded. So we'll try to edit that video down. We'll be able to post a link to that on our webpage. This YouTube video, if you'd like to visit it. Our December gathering is our annual holiday gathering. The information is on our webpage. Our RCP and Becky, Communications Manager, if you would like more information on that or to attend. January will be our annual elections and annual meeting. This will be in the center in Elton. And our friend Gary Swick from Friends of the Fox River will present his State of the Fox River address as part of that. And then we would like you all there to help us envision what our 5 action teams will focus on over the next few years as we go through some visioning, trying to get our new action teams going. And I know some of you have signed up for those. We welcome all of your participation in that. The dates and all the details are on our webpage, foxriverecosystem.org.